I will share my notes first, and then we are sharing the PowerPoint so we can go over this. I think you can see the notes. Yes, maybe. Yes. Okay,
Yes.
I'm gonna put the chat up. I'm gonna put the chat up just in case anybody wants to participate in the chat. So we're talking about, I don't think we mentioned this word the other day, right? Quetzalcoatl, we didn't talk about it. It was in the notes, but we didn't talk about it. Correct? Correct, right?
Correct.
So it's the most important thing, and I probably should have explained that before, but we didn't. So Quetzalcoatl, a lot of people will assume that that means, you can see this on the last week's notes. It's there. It means a feathered serpent. In other words, Quetzal means feathered, and Coat means serpent, right? And so it's very, it's kind of a, it's kind of okay that people think that, because if you look up Quetzalcoatl on Google, like I'm doing it right now, and you look up like images of Quetzalcoatl, like this is what you see. I don't know if you can see my phone there. That's obviously a fake image, right? But there's an actual image of Quetzalcoatl right there. So you can find that on your phone. And the reason, like, let me see if I can zoom in. Maybe see like feathers right there. Yeah, see the feathers, and sort of like the snake head. So people are saying Quetzalcoatl means feathered serpent. If you look up Quetzalcoatl on Google, it'll tell you feathered serpent. It does not mean feathered serpent, right? That's why I say understand your language and learn how to speak it, or even just learn a couple words, or learn the basic, or take a class on your language, because it'll teach you about who you are and where you come from. So let's talk about this word Quetzalcoatl. My uncle, like, why would, let's see, you ever heard of a bird called a Quetzaltotot? So Quetzaltotot, tot, too many T's there. So totot means bird. And what does Quetzal mean again? Or at least what do we think it means? Remember?
Feathers.
Feathers, right? Feathered. So they say the most beautiful bird ever in the history of birds, Mexicanos will obviously say that, is Quetzaltotl. So if you look up a Quetzaltotl, let me see if I can find a good picture of it. There's a whole bunch on like Google Images, it's like a Quetzal bird, right? Y'all heard of Quetzal bird, right? So Quetzaltotl is actually the actual, because Totol means bird. So what's wrong with calling this Quetzaltotl? What's wrong with that definition? Quetzal means what? Feathered bird. What's wrong with calling this a feathered bird? Why is that weird?
Because most birds are feathered.
Because what?
Most birds are
Yeah,
feathered.
thank you. Sorry, I had my volume down. It's redundant. That's like saying, hey, you with the skin. It doesn't make any sense because we all have skin. Hey, you with the hair, or hey, you with the eyeballs. We all have eyes, and a lot of us have hair, right? So it's redundant. So therefore, Quetzal does not mean feathered. You ever heard of the name Quetzal or Quetzali? I have a cousin named Quetzali. My dad, my tío named her Quetzali. So when she was born and he saw her face, what do you think he thought? Wow, she's so feathered? No. What do you think he said? She's so what?
Beautiful.
Beautiful, right? So now it makes a little bit more sense. The most beautiful bird in all of Mexico or Latin America is called a beautiful bird, Quetzaltotl, right? Not feathered bird. So therefore, we know that Quetzal does not mean feathered. It can mean feathered, but it means beautiful. Because feathered serpent, that doesn't mean anything to me, right? So what does coat mean? Do you remember the rules from last week? We have a COA and then the T and the L. What does that L turn into? Do you remember? Like coyote turns into a coyote. So coyote or tomate turns into turns into tomate, right? So you basically take that al and you add two little palitos to it and it changes it to an E, right? So coyote is coyote, aguacat is aguacate, chocolate is chocolate, um, twin, there you go, Luz. So coate, I was gonna ask you this next thing. What does coate mean? And if you kind of say it, like you might understand that it's cuate. And what is a cuate? A twin, a gemelo. And in other words, duality. That's what that means. So what does Quetzalcoatl mean? Beautiful duality, right? Their most precious god, Quetzalcoatl, is not feathered serpent. Yeah, it looks like a serpent with feathers on it, but it means beautiful duality. That's why when we talked about last week about people who are put up on pedestals like married people is because they have duality. It's two people that became one. If you've ever witnessed a marriage ceremony, or twins that are in the womb, they're dual, right? Or dual spirited people like bisexual, trans, etc., etc., etc. You think trans people or bi people or gay people are new? Nah, man, we've always had her, right? And you think that's a new thing? I've heard people say, oh, kids need to stop watching the Disney Channel or whatever, because like there's so many gay people right now. You think our you think there's more gay people now than there were back then? I think it's like, if you really think about it, it's probably always been the same. I heard this from somebody one time. How many tortillerias do you see in Oxnard? You guys are from Oxnard, right? Or maybe you know Oxnard. There's a lot of them, right? You think there was tortillerias? You know tortillerias, like a tortilla shop. You think there was tortillerias back then? Yeah, yes, there was, because that's what they ate. They ate corn. And what do you make out of corn? Tortillas, right? What's the best? Like, you know what I'm having for dinner? You want to know what I'm having for dinner right now? Let me tell you what I'm having for dinner. Tortillas de harina de maíz. Harina, what the heck? Never. I mean, not never. Tortillas de maíz. I should have gotten some homemade ones from down the street because that lady makes them so good, but I didn't know we were having that. With frijoles and queso and chile. That's it. That's what I'm having. And my son's like, ah, and I'm like, dude, I'm like my wife, like, you're a goddess. Thank you for that. You know what I had for dinner on Tuesday night? I had frijoles de la olla, but the white ones, like the Peruvian ones, whatever you call them, with like salsita and aguacate and tomate and queso. What else? And I went all out this time and I bought chicharrones and I put them in there. Oh my goodness. I think I woke up with a six pack. No, I don't have a six pack, but like if I were close to one, I probably would have had one. Like, felt so healthy and so energized. Like, that is what people used to eat back then. Just a plain tortilla, right? So just like they had tortillerias back then, they have them now. They say that we'll learn this today because we're gonna go over 16 conclusions of Aztec music. Or maybe I'll just let you go over them yourself. But they say that they say that that music only happened during ritual. One of you guys asked that in the question, and I think I responded back. That was like the best question that I saw. A very good question. Like, really, music only happened with ritual? In other words, like with like ritual thing that they did, music only happened with ritual and not like just a guy jamming out on his instrument. And I said, you're probably right. You think so everybody was like religious back then, right? During the Aztec times, or sacrifices or whatever they said, right? You think there was people that were like, forget these gods, man. F Quetzalcoatl, F this god and Huitzilopochtli. I don't believe in none of that crap. You think there's people that did that? There's people that do that now. Yes. Just like there's tortillerias now, just like there's gay people now, just like there's trans people now. They had that back then too. There's a lot of people who are atheists. Some people don't believe in this God or that person or whatever, right? There's people that are like that now. You don't think there was people like that back then? I think there was. There's what are things that we have right now is things that we had back then, right? So when people say, I think there's like less gay people in the 1950s, there's probably just as many. It's just that they just don't say nothing because what happens back then? But they nowadays they have a Pride Month. Back then, you get your butt kicked, right? So like you don't say it. Like I don't know if I brought this topic up last week, but when we get to Juan Gabriel, we ask the question, and I think I might have brought it up. Like, is Juan Gabriel gay? And first of all, who cares? What does it matter to me or you? But let's actually think about that question. Why do you think? Let's say he is. Let's assume he is, which is not a good thing to assume, right? When we shouldn't assume things about anybody. Let's not assume he's straight. Let's not assume he's gay. But let's just assume because everybody's saying that he is and all that. Why do you think he never said, I am uh straight or gay or whatever? How come we never said that? Probably because in Mexico, we're fine with you, but once you say that you are, then you might lose fans or whatever, right? So he's from the old school. He's from the old school, man. Like it's not anything that you want to say. It's like taboo, right? So things that we have nowadays, we had back then too, right? Just like tortillas. So, back to the issue of Guate, he will lose fan base. Many people do not want to know their idols are queer, and like everybody knows that he's queer or gay, right? But like, and it's funny in Mexico, like a lot of Mexicanos, they'll go to like a trans show, You've seen that, like they'll go to it and they'll get a lap dance and they'll laugh about it and everything's fine. But God forbid their neighbor is gay or their son is gay because they'll have a freaking fit. Like it's like, what? You were just at like a transvestite like strip show yesterday, but now you're like, you can't, your son is playing with Barbies and now you're mad, like it's crazy the double standard that exists in Mexico. I don't know the answer as to why, um, and I don't care to know as to why he never came out. Like came out of what? I don't even. For all we know, he's straight or crooked or whatever we want to call it. I don't even know. All right. So let's get back to this Nahuatl stuff. Don't be duped. Study language, especially the Nahuatl language, because it's a source of inspiration. It'll inspire you. I don't know if we brought this topic up last week, but it's grammatically incorrect to refer to your mother as my mom. Did we talk about that last week? No, no, maybe, no, yes. I don't think so, right? So you ever seen that, especially amongst Mexicanos, where they're like, let's say my brother's right here, and I'm like, hey, my mom wants you. Isn't that weird for you all? Because then you would assume that we have different mothers, right? Do you guys get what I'm saying? Do some of you do that? And my mom, you refer to your mom when you're with your siblings as my mom. You've heard that before? You've seen that before? Yeah, my mom was actually like when I was a kid, she became a realtor, but when I was born, she was like a teacher. And so she never let us say like my mom, but my dad does that with his brothers. My mom, she wants you, or my mom said this, my mom said that. And I would always be like, and my mom didn't let us say that because that's technically grammatically incorrect. But a lot of Mexicanos say that. I was lecturing on this topic last night in another similar class like this one. And one of the students said, yeah, like Huicholes, they speak like that in Spanish. And I said, exactly my point. So do the Aztecs. They're very possessive in their language, which means they refer to their mother as my mom. Even when they're talking to their sibling, they refer to everything as mine, mine, mine. Not because they're machos or anything. No, that's just the way their language is. It's possessive. And that language is hardly spoken in the United States, but we still use similar rules. Like we still say my mom. In other words, we we still say that, which is grammatically incorrect because the Aztecs said it 500, 600 years ago or more. So like it says here, the Aztec language of Nahuatl is a possessive language, and that possessive characteristic is passed forward to our own ways of speaking in present day here in the United States, right? It's interesting that the reason we say my mom is probably the reason is probably because they said it many, many, many years ago, and they still speak like that in Nahuatl in Mexico. There's a lot of people that only speak Nahuatl in Mexico. Do you guys have any questions um about anything Aztec or anything Nahuatl or any random questions that you guys may have before we move on to sort of like the music part? Nada? Okay. All right. Some people ask weird questions like, hey, I heard they were cannibals. Or hey, I heard pozole used to be like body parts. So I'm glad that nobody has any off the wall questions like that. No, pozole was not body parts. Um, let's see. I stopped sharing. What was I gonna share now? I think let's go over some of these instruments really quick. Wait, I shared the wrong thing. There we go. So I put this lecture up for, not this lecture, this PowerPoint up for, so you can see it on your own. I don't know if we discussed this history back then. I should have like rewatched the lecture from last week. The Aztecs migrated in the 1100s and they landed in Mexico in the 1300s. And 200 years later, in the 1500s, the Spaniards came over and they broke apart that empire. So these are the instruments that they used to play. I don't need you to memorize these. I just need you to know like a couple specific things about a couple specific instruments. Um, but like you learn about Native Americans, you learn things like for example, when Native Americans would kill a deer, they'd use the antlers and the hide and all that. They use all parts of the animal, right? So the same thing occurs with this type of culture and this music here. So Tecocoli is a conch shell. Um, we have, so the reason we don't really talk about the music of Aztec culture in this class is because we have no idea what it sounded like. We have no clue. I've seen in the codices, which are like the written thing that the Aztecs wrote down, there's like one or two pictures that exist which show a huehue drum, which is the one drum, the two drums you need to memorize are huehue and teponazli, right? Just for the quiz. Okay, a huehue drum, it's very big, like it goes up to like my waist, and they're very big drums, and they play it with like drumsticks, some big fat drumsticks, right? So you maybe have seen that if you ever seen a like Aztec dancers and stuff like that. But if you look at the pictures of Aztec people that they drew themselves of the huehue, nobody's ever using sticks. They're always using their hands. You could see the hands like that. So why are they using sticks? Actually, now we actually know that it doesn't sound anywhere near like what it sounds like nowadays. We have no idea what these instruments sound like. We don't even know what they look like for the most part. We see like small images on the few codices that were not burned by the Spaniards, and we try to replicate them. So maybe the huehue was big, maybe it was small, maybe the teponazli was big or small, but we have no clue. Not only that, we don't know like what their role was. We didn't know how it was played. Somebody asked the question about the 16 conclusions. Somebody said, because there's no like music notation. The question was, how do they know and memorize music and know what's coming and all that when like you're not writing it down? So the reason is because you internalize music. You have to memorize it. That's the answer to that. You just have to memorize it, right? So we'll talk about that. I think if we have time today, we'll go over the 16 conclusions, right? So let's go over some of these instruments super fast, and I'll stop on the ones that we need to stop on. Ayot, those are obviously turtle shells, and if you think that's nasty, I don't know. Take a look at what you're eating in your chicken McNuggets, but turtles aren't that nasty. Turtle soup is really good, actually. I've heard. I've never had turtle soup, but they supposedly they we don't need to talk about turtle soup, but maybe we can. There's a reason why people eat turtle soup. I remember being in Mexico one time. Um, one of my buddies was talking to me about all the foods that they eat, and they use it to like impregnate when they can't like get their wife pregnant. They eat turtle soup and it helps them to get pregnant. So there's a lot of like different, like tacuache. You ever eat possum? Maybe not, but you can eat possum soup, and it's supposed to clear up all your acne and supposed to cure you of asthma. I've heard stories like miracles of people who've had asthma their whole lives. They go to Mexico and eat a tacuache soup, and then like just like that, they don't have asthma anymore. It's crazy. Um, Cacalachli are the rattles, similar like the chicuatzli, which is chicahuatzli, sorry, that you see there. Chichli is a whistle. Coyolo are these beads, these shells that you wear on your ankles. So not only are you like playing something with your right or left hand, but every time you dance, it makes a sound. So you're playing actual rhythm with your feet. Here are the two instruments that are important. Hopefully you can click on that link there. I'm not gonna watch it today, but you click on that link. So I'll tell you the quick story about the huehue. The huehue and teponazli. The huehue is a big horizontal drum. Sorry, vertical drum, vertical. The teponazli is a horizontal thing, like sideways, like horizon, right? Well, actually, not that big, but so the huehue and teponazli were gods. This kind of sounds like Greek mythology. They were gods, and this is before like a lot of people existed in Earth and all that stuff. So they looked down and they said, "Man, Earth is boring. People just eat and sleep, and that's all they do." So they got the idea because they were musicians to like go down to Earth and teach people how to play music. So like, hey, we teach them how to play music. We can watch them dance. Like our life here up in the heavens will be better because now we have something to watch. So all the other gods got mad that Wewan Teponasi taught them how to play music because music is only for the gods, right? So they were banished to earth and turned into drums so that people could be on their heads and pray to the heavens every time they do it. Because again, most of this music was for ritual. Like you're not just playing on your drum like at your house because you're happy. You're like using it for some sort of like ritual, some sort of like religious thing that exists, right? Or that's going on. So that's the story behind Wewe and Teponasi. And that's why these Wewets are like so sacred. And if we have time, we'll talk about that later on today. I'm gonna end this slide and open up another one pretty soon. But we also have so the two that we need to know. The Wewet is a vertical drum, like the alpha, and the omega, the number two drum, is a teponatzli. And if you see the two keys here, it's like two different keys. Again, if you click on this link, you'll be able to see an example of teponazli. There's another sort of conch shell like we saw here with the tecocoli. This one's called the tequichli. You have a tecomapiloa, which is a wewet with the gourd at the end. You have a whole bunch of flutes called lapizali. 2-barrel flutes, 3-barrel flutes is a whole bunch. But again, we don't know what it sounds like. We have no idea. If you click on this first link, Indigenous Mexican instruments, you'll find something very wrong. You see like an example pictures, like all these indigenous instruments, but in the background, you hear like Spanish guitars. What's wrong with that? Anybody know what's wrong with that? What's wrong with those Spanish guitars being in the background?
They're not
This,
native.
the, yeah, the Spanish guitars don't belong to that era of music for the Aztecs.
That's right. So if someone has a like here's a presentation of Aztec music, a video, but in the background we're gonna play like Spanish guitars, como que that doesn't make any sense, right? Like because they didn't exist then. So let me share my screen and go over these I think I have the conclusions right here. Can you see the conclusions? Yes. Let me see if I can move them over here.
I can see them 1 through 5,
Alright.
right?
Yeah, there's 16. We're gonna go. You were supposed to go over them, and but I wanted to focus on a couple of other ones. We're gonna go through them really quick. So this is why they exist. In case you didn't get that from the first little couple sentences, there are 16 conclusions of Aztec music that were made decades ago by this man by the name of Robert Stevenson. This guy was a musicologist or ethnomusicologist, super smart guy. I knew him because he would walk around the halls of UCLA, and I got to know him when I was a student there. Crazy smart guy. Like I don't wanna like talk too much about him, but when he was like 40 something, he already had written like 10 books. I think in his lifetime, he wrote like 30 something books. Like, I can't even write a paragraph. This dude wrote like 30 something books. And like, he was a leading expert on like Peruvian music, on indigenous Aztec music, on like Colombian music. Like, he was the world expert on all these different types of things. So, what he did, this is what he told me too. I was like, hey, how do you come up with the conclusions of Aztec music? I asked him one time because I would see him a lot. And he goes, well, I read everything that there was to read on Aztecs, and I come up with 16 conclusions. And I said, like, everything? And he goes, yes, everything. This guy, this is how he would read. I would see him, he had 2 bodyguards. I don't know why, like buff, like bodybuilder bodyguards that always surrounded him anywhere. And he walked down the halls like this, no joke, like this. I don't know how you can read like this, but he was always reading. So then I believe that he read everything. And there wasn't a lot written in the 60s and the 50s, right? So maybe 30, 40 books. So he read every book. And after reading all those books, he decided, I'm going to write my own conclusions, right? So he came up with 16 conclusions, and these are his findings. He took out all the things that were biased and all that stuff. And he decided, okay, based on all that I've read, because there's a lot of biased things, right? Because after the Aztec codices, their history was burned, the Spanish crown forced the Spaniards to rewrite the history. So they wrote it in a bad way, right? Imagine you ask me, hey, tell me about your ex-girlfriend. I'll be like, yeah, she's a toxica, man. Nah, right? I'm not gonna give you the right answer. I'm not gonna tell you she's smart, she's this or that. Nah, because I'm biased about that, right? So same thing. When you write something about the Aztecs and you're Spaniard, you're gonna write a lot of bad things. So Robert Stevenson kind of saw that. He put all that to the side and came up with 16 conclusions. Number one, music had no independent life of its own. I don't believe that. I think there was people who weren't even into religion and rituals, and they were just jamming out, not on their guitars. They keep doing this because they didn't have guitars. Let's skip to the last one, and then we're gonna come back to number two. Though their music lacked string tone and was predominantly percussive, the Aztecs had an acute sense of pitch. In other words, there were no stringed instruments in indigenous Mexico. Who brought the stringed instruments? Somebody, I think Jose said it. The Spaniards brought them over, right? They brought over those stringed instruments, and we're gonna learn about this next week. I think the Spaniards brought over stringed instruments, and the Mexicanos used those stringed instruments and they played them like drums. So you know what a huehuet is? We learned about that 5 minutes ago. ¿Cómo se dice? Drum, right? What's a mecate? Those of you that know horses, or maybe you don't, but you know what a mecate is?
A rope.
Like a rope, right? So meca is string and huehuet is drum. So their first guitars, like the ones maybe you see hanging up on the wall, were called string drum, meca huehuet. Meca from the word mecate, and huehuet from the word drum. So they play them like super like drums, right? You ever seen a classical musician play all nice and soft and all that stuff? But these guys got that and we're like, well, we only know how to play drums, so we're gonna play them like this. That's why mariachis are like and you know, all broken and all that stuff, right? That's why. So that turns into like mariachi music, that combination of Spanish and they just turn into mariachi music. Next week we're gonna talk about jarocho, turn into jarocho music, turns into the music from Michoacan, turns into all this like popular music that we all know and understand and love. So let's go. So they had no stringed instruments. They say there was one stringed instrument that existed in indigenous Mexico, and it was a musical bow. In other words, the bow and arrow, right? That bow and arrow, if you pull it, it goes ding, ding, right? It makes a noise. So from that, they made their first instrument. In Africa, they have a bow and arrow with a gourd underneath it. So you pull the bow and it resonates in that gourd that's hollowed out and the sound shoots out. If you add 2 or 3 more strings, you get a basically like a guitar or a violin, right? And you use that arrow that you pull with as like your violin bow and stuff like that. So that's where all these musical instruments come from this string called from this instrument called the musical bow. So if there was a stringed instrument, they just didn't write it down. There could have been stringed instruments. We just don't know anything. If there was, it was probably the musical bow. Imagine an Azteca hanging around there on like Rose Avenue or on Channel Islands Boulevard or Oxnard Boulevard, and he sees a deer and he's waiting for deer and he just pulls on his bow and arrow and like ding, like, oh man, this makes noise. I'm gonna use it as an instrument, right? Why wouldn't there be stringed instruments? I think there probably was. Just nobody knows about them, right? Because again, their history was deleted. Number two, a professionalized caste system existed. You guys know what a caste system is? Like a pyramid, you know, like the rich people on top, poor people on the bottom. So that existed in like in music too. Like there was different levels of musicians. But even then, like number three says, training of an extremely rigid kind was a prerequisite to a career in music. So people were training since like age 5. Like your job, Jose, would be to be a musician. Your job, Luz or Stephanie, were to be a teacher, and your job, whomever else, like Monique, was to be like a cook or something like that. That's what you did your entire life. So you had to be good at music because that's all you did. Not like me that I play music and then I also teach. No. You're either a teacher or you're a musician. Like they only did one thing. So they had like crazy rigid, extremely rigid training. And let's see, number 4, imperfectly executed rituals. Like if you mess up, we're thought to offend rather than please the gods. So there's this, what's the connection between, what can we use, what's the tool that we use us humans on earth to the heavens? What can get us up there, right? What is it? What gets us up there? Anybody want to answer that? Anybody know?
Imitating what the Bible says and praying and helping others.
Right. But I'm not saying like what gets us up there when we die. I'm saying like what gets us up there now. Like what can connect us to God? What connects us to God? You said it right now. What is it? It's prayer, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and like if you go to a lot of churches, how do they pray? I'm not talking about like the prayers. I'm talking about how do they do it? They sing, right? They sing. One time I had a vocal teacher. He told me he came in all mad. I was like, "What happened?" He goes, "I fired the drummer," and this kid was like 14. I was like, "The drummer at church?" He goes, "Yeah, because he was a musical director." And I said, "Why?" During the guitar solo, he didn't have to play, but I caught him texting his girlfriend or something, and I was like, "So you made him quit?" Like, yeah, like you gotta be all in it for God. He was a Christian guy, so you gotta be in it. Like, if you're not in it, then don't waste your time here, because you are the vehicle that takes these people to God. And I said, man, you're being way too strict. But then when you think about it, like if you read the Bible or know the history of like what happened, who was the devil? Like if you believe that a devil and a God exists, who was the devil? He was an angel, and what was his job when he was up there in the heavens? If you don't know that, the devil used to be like hanging out with God up there, right? And then they banished him to earth, kind of like Wewe and Debonasli. Same exact story. Wewe and Debonasli were musicians. What do you think the devil was? Also a musician. Y se le subió el poder, like it got to his head, right? So he got banished, right? Because music is a powerful tool. What makes you high? Two things that make you high: drugs and what else? Music gets you high, right? Like, trance music. You ever heard of trance, right? Like, and
Yeah.
like that type, like, what's the purpose of that music? To sort of like get you high, right? So imagine, and that's without drugs. Imagine with a little bit of drugs, right? So there's this in Cuban culture, um I think we have time to talk about this. There's this drum called the bata drum, and it's supposed to like call the gods down to you. So maybe Jose, you have Shango that's linked to you. So they believe in Cuban culture that every person is linked to a certain god or deity, right? It's called like Santeria. That's the name of the religion. So they believe that. Whether you believe it, it doesn't matter. Like a Cuban guy could come in right now and be like, "Yeah, Professor, you are Shango, and Jose, you're this, and Luz and Stephanie, and you're that, and you're that," and you're like, "But I don't believe that. I'm Christian, or I'm Mormon, or I'm Catholic, or whatever, or I'm atheist." But it doesn't matter what you believe. I'm telling you, like, I know that what God is assigned to you. So about that drum, it's called a talking drum because you can move it, the strings, and it'll make it sound like if someone's talking. So if you know how to play the bata drum in that Cuban culture, you can call upon the God to like inhabit your spirit, right? So I've seen videos. I did an interview with this professor who passed away a couple years ago, Francisco Aguabella, who was from Cuba, and that's all he did was like he played drums and he would call upon gods. So I had a paper, so I do not in his class, and I sent him an email, or not an email. I gave him a call or something. I said, "Let me go to your office and interview you," because I knew who he was already. "Help me out with this paper. I need to write it by this week." So he started talking about how these gods come down and they take over your soul. And I was like, "That's a bunch of BS, right?" And he goes, "No, no, watch a video." And he put a video on, and and it was him in a ritual. There was like this lady. He started playing the tambor, and she went up, and like she all of a sudden she was just dancing, and then she like got all weird, and she went to the back and lit her dress on fire. I was like, "What the heck?" And then when he changed the rhythm, she snapped out of it, and she was all embarrassed because she was naked, all burned, but she wasn't burned, right? And I said, "That's fake." And he looks at me and he's like, "Fake, man? Like these videos are like 20 years old, like 30 years old. It's from like the 70s. There was no Photoshop back then, He goes, "That's not fake. Just don't tell no one you saw this." And I was like, "Okay." Second video, some lady, you probably think I'm lying. second video, the second person, he starts playing a different rhythm, and this lady's just dancing. All of a sudden, she starts speaking in tongues, like right. And I was like, that's fake. She gets a freaking knife from the back and starts stabbing herself like this. And I was like freaking out because I was like 19, 20 years old, never even heard of that. And then she snapped out of it and she dropped the knife, and her clothes were all ripped, but she had no, like, she was not hurt. The third one was this white lady who just like went in just to like investigate, but she wasn't Cuban or nothing. She was 100% white. And he goes, watch what I do to this lady. Not that I do it. I just play to her God, and the God does whatever he wants to her. So I was like freaking out. I was like, damn, brujeria. Like, I need to get out of this office. So he started like playing the drum in the video. And this lady must have been like 80, 85. She was like old viejita, white hair, glasses, like can barely even walk, right? She did the the Michael Jackson lean where you lean your whole body. She leaned all the way to the floor. You ever seen like a gymnast like fall and then push himself back up? Okay, she didn't push herself back up. She just leaned and came back up like that, and her arms were straight down the whole time. And I said, what the heck is that? And I was like, I gotta get out of here. He goes, that's like the power of these spirits. And I was like, but I don't believe it. And he goes, it doesn't matter. Like, if you ever come to my ritual, once I start feeling your energy, I would know what God is assigned to you. It could be this, or that God. And once I play, it comes into your body. And I was like, that's crazy. Because that's how important music is. Music is the key for humans to like communicate up there, right? That's why Aztecs and Native Americans, they would do a little bit of like peyote or whatever. They wouldn't get high, they wouldn't get drugged up. They just do it because what do drugs do to you? They relax you, right? They relax you. Like all of us, like if you want to go dance with the girl at a nightclub, but you're afraid, then let me go take a quick little shot so I can calm myself down. All right. So I can get all these nerves out. So it relaxes you and lets you open up your mind for so that the music can like let you. So that's why if you're a musician in the Aztec Empire and you mess up, you basically break that connection to the heavens. And sometimes they kill you for it, right? That was a long number 4. Number 5, singers and players, because of the important part music played in Aztec life, enjoyed prestige. But like number 6 says, some of these musicians were not recorded in the history books unless they were royalty. So I don't know if you ever heard of Nezahualcóyotl. I used to have a brown t-shirt with a picture of this guy and it said Nezahualcóyotl. I never knew who he was, but I thought it was cool when I was in high school. Nezahualcóyotl was one of the Aztec kings, but he was also a poet. That's why his name is written in the history books. In other words, you're cool as a musician and we love you and we need you, but we don't need to write your name down. Like, you're part of the process, right? You're not that. You're not a god. Calm down. All right, number 7. Music was regarded as a means of community. So you play within a ritual, within a community. There's no like solos being taken. Like, you're not like jamming out on your guitar. Nah, it's all like part of like a community, right? So just like number 8 says, instrumental performances, like instruments like drums always went with singing and always went with dancing. They always had those together. Some instruments like the huehue and the teponazli, like number 9 says, were thought to have divine origin, right? They were gifts from like the god. Just like in Cuban music, the bata is like a baptized drum. Like, you have to baptize. I can't make you go into trance on a bata that I bought at Guitar Center. It has to be like made by Cuban hands and like baptized and all that. Let's see. I think we can skip the rest of them. Number 12, every piece of music was composed for a certain time and place. The religious calendar was like 260 days, so you needed a song for each of those days. So you had to memorize all those songs. And also, since they have no music notation, like way of writing it down, like you have to, there was an oral tradition. You pass it down orally from generation to generation. And like number 14 says, musicians not only learned old songs, but they had to compose new ones. So they had to be creative. For example, like those powerful warriors that would hire musicians to write ballads about their military successes. What does that remind you of? Warriors hiring musicians to make songs about their musical military successes. What does that remind you of? Say that again. You're like cut off big time. Or type it in the chat. What does that remind you of, people? Anybody? I'll tell you. Narcos hiring musicians to write songs about them, right? Corridos, in other words. So these military cats were hiring these musicians to write songs about what they did on the battlefield. People say corridos come from Spain and they were made popular in the 1800s, 1900s in Mexico. And the word corrido comes from the word correr, like go spread the word. Like they had corridos in Spain. I am sure that's true. That's where corrido comes from. But what the heck is number 14 then? That's not a corrido? Yes, it's a corrido. Corridos have been in Mexico for thousands of years. They didn't call them corridos, and they were mocha cabeza songs or tumbados or whatever they are nowadays, right? But they were still corridos. And we already talked about number 16. So let me stop sharing this. Do you guys have any questions about that? Nah, nada. Make sure in the slide about the instruments, which I have right there on Canvas, make sure you guys make sure you guys click on the link about the huehuet, because it'll explain it in Spanish and the teponazzi. That way you can at least hear it. And let's see. Let me open up my Canvas one more time. So you can see exactly what you're supposed to do this week. I'll open up the student view and I will share my video or my screen. All right, let's go. What's the date today? This November, September 2nd, right? Yeah, thank you. So you have a discussion due next week, Wednesday. You also have the Indigenous notes that I provided for you just right now, and then the instrument PowerPoint. So there's not a lot of major reading. Next week we have some sort of reading. So let's see. After reading the assigned readings from last week and the PowerPoint, answer the 2 questions. And the questions are this. Oops, let me move this because I can't read them. Discuss 2 examples of how indigenous Mexican culture is present in our everyday lives, or maybe you're not Mexican, but you know of other like ancient cultures. For example, Mexicanos ate tortillas and we ate tortillas. You know, that's an example. So give me 2 examples and don't use that example because I just gave it to you, right? So that's the homework for today. So or for next week, right? So, and I'll remind you guys that the video is up for the people that didn't get to watch. And I'll also remind you that you have your discussion due next week. And then next week, I don't think we're gonna meet. I think we're gonna, I'm gonna assign you a reading. It's kind of dense, but it's very short. It's from this book called Music in Mexico. I don't assign you the book because it's a no book free class, right? And plus that book is like $50. So I made copies of the first 2 chapters. I think I'll put them up for next week. So next time I see you, well, next week on Thursday, I'll let you know, hey, don't forget Canvas is up. So I don't think we'll lecture next week. I think next week I'll pre-record the lecture and I'll post it up. So instead of meeting here at 7:15 live and then in todo color and everything, I'll just upload it and you can watch it on your own free time anytime you want. And then again, do that. And then I think we have a quiz coming up in a couple weeks too. So we'll start talking about that next week. And yeah, it'll be very easy because I'll give you a study guide. So no more questions.